And we're live. Ask the Podcast Coach for December 7th, 2024.
Let's get ready to podcast.
There it is. It's that music that means it's Saturday morning. It's time for Ask the Podcast Coach, where you get your podcast questions answered live. I'm Dave Jackson from the School of Podcasting.com, and joining me right over there is the one and only Jim Cullison from theaverageguy.tv. Jim, how's it going, buddy?
Greetings, Dave. Happy Saturday morning to you. Good to be with you. I know it's always good to be here on a Saturday morning, a crisp, chilly Saturday morning.
It is, yeah. I went out this morning, got some gas in the car, and, you bend over in certain ways and the wind hits you and you're like, oh, wow, that's
chilly.
That's not good. Yeah. And I don't know why, but it's always good when you start off the show with some complaints about your technology, but like, I'm going to click the button right now. Okay. And of course it worked. A second ago when I said, I'm Dave Jackson from the School of Podcasting, nothing happened. And then I said, hey, and over there is Jim Cullison. And it waited like 5 seconds and then it kicked you in. And of course now it's working great because
it was just waking up. It's chilly.
That was it. It is. Yeah. It's cold.
Chilly.
The Stream Deck's a little, little groggy this morning. So excellent. Yeah. But you know what'll wake you up?
A little bit of coffee.
Right. That's right. So, and that coffee pour is brought to you by our good friend Mark over at podcastbranding.co. The beautiful thing about Mark is I've used him for a lot of my products, and he's going to sit down with you one-on-one, and you could go to a guy on, I don't know, Fiverr or wherever, and they're going to give you one example. They're going to be like, all right, here's your artwork. And you go, but could you get it? Like, no, Mark's going to give you three, at least three, I would think. I know when I've used him, he's always given me three. So you can go, all right, what if I took part of number 3 and put it with number 1 and use the font from like you can completely customize this to where you're 100% happy. Not just like, here's your artwork, thanks for your money, I'm out of here. He really wants to make sure that you are happy with your artwork and it really matches your brand. And if you go, I don't know that if I have a brand. Well, he's not just an artwork guy. He can work on your website, anything that you're putting out to the public, he can help you with. So when you're ready to look good, there's only one place to go, and that is podcastbranding.co.
Such happy music. Big thanks to our good friend Dan Lefebvre over there, based on a true story podcast.com. Today, as we're recording this, December 7th, this is Pearl Harbor Day here in the United States. And of course, he released Tora, Tora, Tora. So if you want to go back and look, if you're a World War II enthusiast of some kind, those two words don't go together. Nobody's enthusiastic about war, but maybe about the time period. Check it out today. His review out there with John Partial is available right now. Check it out. Based on a true story, podcast.com. Dan, thanks for your sponsorship. It's a lot like, I wanted to say, happy Pearl Harbor Day, but you don't really, can't really say it that way, right? It was, of course, a very tragic day in American history, but
a day that will live in infamy, if I remember right.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. Oh, you even kind of had the accent right on that one.
Yeah. I just remember it's, because it's from 1942 or whatever, and I don't think it was, I should know, this is where I'm not a history buff, but I want to say Eisenhower, but that might be too early.
No, Roosevelt.
There you go. Yeah. So a day that will live in, because it's always bad audio. Yeah. That's always good.
You see, it's a little bit like podcasting 15 years ago where you could see the difference between the technology, right? You look back, even some of those early, like in the 40s, in the Senate, or in those buildings, they're dark, like they're not lit very well, and the microphones are giant, these giant things with metal around them, and I mean it's just, you like, wow, that's really the way they did it back then. But the lighting is the most shocking in that building. You go back and watch some of those things, it's just dark in there, and these big stone buildings that are just pitch black. Today, of course, I mean, everything is designed for the TV camera, right? Everything is designed to pick up the sound, but not so much in 1941.
Well, that and cameras are much more adept at recording in low light situations, and then
Oh, for sure.
lights are so much better. I remember
Yeah.
being that it's, we're closing in on Christmas. My uncle would take home movies every year, and every year after dinner we would all sit in the living room and watch last year's home movie and the year before and the year before. And this was, I remember he had these lights, and every home movie is people, especially if you're up close, just like, here's somebody going and just squinting, like, I can't see because I have the sun in front of me with a movie camera. It's like made for the worst movies
Those
ever.
old family photos when you would take them in the sun because that was the best sunlight, but
Right.
then everybody's got their
Yeah. Yeah.
oh, the 70s. Thank God for the 70s.
Well, but speaking of that, it
Yeah.
is interesting that just if you think about the other day, I still have one. I'm going through. I have so much stuff. It turns out last night I have a friend coming over that comes in about once a quarter. I grew up with him. I've known him for over 40 years, and so my house is always a mess. And so I'm like, you know what? I've got all this Christmas stuff. I'm like, you know what? I'm just gonna look what's in my closets. I have so much gear in my closet. Like I have like a brand new Tascam Mixcast 4 just sitting here in the box. I think I used it once and never used it again. And but looking at this stuff, one of them is a Mix Pre 6, and
Oh,
that thing
yeah.
was like $800.
Yeah, that's a nice box.
Yeah, and of course there's a newer model, but it's amazing looking at, like, that was $800. I don't know, probably 6 years ago, and now you can get PodTrack P4 that pretty much does everything. Now, granted, the what do you call it? The things, the preamps in the Mix Pre are far superior than the Zoom one, but the Zoom one is definitely worth using. But yeah, I need to have another garage sale, and just like here, I think it's Tom Buck, who's a really popular YouTuber, and he does the same thing. He buys stuff and then he's like, "What? I'm not going to use this anymore," and so he just sells it. I think it's like whatever it is, it's $100 plus $25 for shipping.
Yeah,
And
it's good just to get rid of
he's
it.
losing his
Yeah.
shirt, but he's like, yeah, it's not making me any money in my closet.
What you're losing it, it's just sitting there. You're losing your shirt. Like at
Yeah.
some point, it's going to be worthless. This is my dilemma: is I hold on to stuff until it's absolutely obsolete.
Yeah.
And then you're like, oh yeah, okay.
Nobody
I guess
wants
this
to buy
Windows
it.
phone is not really going to work anymore. Pulling the Zune out of the drawer, or some of those kinds of things. Got some Radio Shack equipment, right? And you're like, yeah, this doesn't make any sense anymore. There's a sweet spot in there. Just when we think about podcasters and podcasting equipment and the sales cycle that goes with this, there's a sweet spot in there. And there's individuals that are really good at this, of like buying a piece of equipment, using it for 3 or 4 years. That's kind of seemed to be a good spot for that equipment. And then replacing it. And when you replace it, selling the piece of equipment you have for half or a quarter or what, just getting something out of it and moving on. That is not me, but there are people who are really good at that. The opposite end is individuals who are replacing their equipment every 6 months because something new came out, right? We have the Rodecaster Pro 17,
Yeah.
and you're like, didn't 16 come out in June? And you're like, yeah, it did, but I gotta have the 17. Maybe I'm talking about iPhones. Maybe that's what I'm talking about.
I just bought the Shure Move mic, right? The little lavs, and literally 2 weeks later, Rode came out with their little smaller version. Now the Shure still, like, the Shure microphones are the size of your thumbnail. They're really tiny. But it's like every time you buy anything, it's like, Randy says, did anyone see that the Zoom PodTrack P8 is on sale for $249? Yeah, which I'm kind of hoping when I see like equipment go, like right now, the Focusrites, all the Vocaster 1 and Vocaster, those are getting really cheap. And that usually means they're getting ready to come out with a new version. Or usually that'll really kick into gear after the new version comes out. And you're like, wait, why is this so cheap? And you're like, oh, it's the Vocaster 3 now. Oh, okay. And it's got, whatever, some new feature that you probably may or may not use. But you got to get it because it's the new one. And, you want to be like the cool kids.
Yeah. Yeah.
Get
Well, the cycle, right? I think we're into the cycle now where these organizations are, so you spend the year in R&D development getting ready to go. And then for Black Friday, you clear out all your inventory of the old stuff. You make an announcement about it in January at CES, and then you start selling them February, March timeframe. It's different for everybody, but that general timeframe. And you just kind of lather, rinse, repeat every year. So we see these cycles go on pretty quickly. One of the things that's been interesting, microphones themselves have been fairly stale in their development. Like we haven't seen a lot of new microphone types. There's been the wireless labs have had some development stuff, but what reminded me of that is this week or last week, one of my engineers at work said, "Hey, we're getting you a new microphone." And I was like, "Well, I didn't ask for one." Like, why? And he's like, "I thought you'd be happy when you won." And he says that we're going to get you Shure SM7Bs. And I was like, oh, I mean, I've used an ATR 2100 for 12 years. It's a great microphone. It works. He's like, "Yeah, no, I want to get you a better one. And we're going to get you, I want one of those low profile boom arms that comes up from the bottom." And he's like, "I don't like the over the top thing." And I'm like, "Okay, well, I'm not going to say no." And so yesterday yesterday I got an email and he was like, your new toys are in. Do you want to meet me in the studio? So we had a day of setting up, monkeying around with. Oh, hold on. Can you give me another coffee?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. Is that
You're thirsty
Sarah?
today.
Yeah, Sarah's looking for some coffee, so she's down here.
There we go.
So we got there you go. We got the boom arm in, the mic set up. We got it tested. It sounds really good. I mean, does it sound, we always say this, it's a $400 mic, right? 400 versus 100. Is it 400? Is it $300 better? Maybe, but
really?
It looks good. I mean, I've got it like you, coming straight up, and it'll be the reason we did that was they kind of want to standardize our podcast setup across our sites. So the guy who has to do that, it's like, okay, I want a standard setup. Whenever we do something, I'm going to buy this, this, and this, and they're going to go in, and the support guys are going to know exactly how to set them up and exactly how to put them in. And so we have a new studio going in, sort of a pop-up studio going in Chicago, and we've built one in Washington, D.C. So they've got now, what he was really doing for me was standardizing my setup for the setup they put into D.C. So everybody's the same. And that's smart, right? Standardizing that equipment.
Yeah. So what's your plugging? Yeah. What you be plug no, the SM7B is going into what?
Oh, a Focusrite. Yeah, Focusrite.
Yeah, because
I've got the big one with the 4.
Yeah. Because Chris was saying you might want to throw a cloud lifter on that. He's like, but if you're going into a Focusrite, it probably has enough gain to handle it.
Yeah.
Now
I've got the gain turned up quite a bit on that to still make it work. And a cloud lifter could work. I'm not gonna, at least at this point. I think it's gonna be fine. But
do you like the sound of your voice on that mic? Because people always go, "Dave, you're using a pod mic USB," and I've got it sitting right here. Well, it was. I have an SM7B right behind me. No, it's right here. I see it. I was like,
oops.
Right? I could, and it's the Joe Rogan mic, and I don't hate this mic. I just like my voice on this mic better. And I mean, and before this, I had the RE320, and I like my. I don't know if it's because I'm, when I joke, but I'm kind of not joking. I'm assuming there are higher frequencies that I used to hear that I don't anymore. And so I always tend to boost I like my S's and T's very clear. And on that mic, they were really clear. And Jim was always like, "I always thought you sounded a little, it's a little harsh." And this one, crispy. The SM7B is definitely more muddy. And that's where I'm like, this is one kind of in the middle. It's still got the low end, and I love the fact that this has, basically, if you're using, this is the Rode Pod Mic USB, and you can kind of go in and make your settings and then save them in the mic. But I think that only works if you're using the USB, which I'm not. This is going into the Rodecaster Duo. But in the end, I just like the way, pretty much this is where I kind of go, it doesn't matter, because no matter what mic I have on this, I'm going to dial it in until my ears go, oh. Wow. So, but I mean, do you like your voice better
Yeah,
on that mic, do you?
better. It's fuller than
Mm,
this microphone. Like it's just a fuller version of just a little bit, and it's really hard to tell, to be honest. But and I left the settings on the back just flat. I didn't change anything on there's two sets of settings on the back where you can kind of change some
right.
of the things to make it do. So read the instructions. I'm like, well, let's just start. I'm a big stock guy. I like to
Yeah.
leave things kind of stock if at all possible. So we're going to leave it stock for now. We'll test it. We'll do some full tests. I have some recordings coming up next week. This would have been a good week to have it. I had 4 recordings this week, so that would have
Oh,
been
nice.
a nice thing to have. But we'll test it out over the holidays, and then have a full recording schedule that we're starting to set up, starting post like January. So it'll get a lot of use. You think about this. By the time you record it, and then you record it to stream, we use StreamYard. You record it in a StreamYard, and then it gets downloaded in my audio editor processes it in some way, and then you take it and push it into an MP3 file, where it's getting compressed, and then
Yeah.
you also you're pushing it to YouTube, which they add compression to it as well when they process it. You kind of wonder. It makes you like, yes, garbage in, garbage out, and if you can start with the best possible signal you can get, if you can create those as much data, that sounds good to start with. But I just wonder, Dave, how much you lose in all the walk downs of, it's kind of like the power company, they're sending
Right.
9,000 volts at you, right? And by the time it gets to you, it's stepped down to 240, a 3-phase 240. You kind of just wonder yeah, what it goes through. Randy says your content is still 100% live streamed. And that is true. We still do everything live first. It made me think, Dave, and maybe you can give me some advice on this. He was like, I can't believe I said no to this. He's like, I said, well, now I'm gonna have to replace my mic at home because the studio at home has an ETR 2100. He goes, you want me to send you one? I was like, no, I'm not. I'm working. I'm not working at home anymore
Yeah.
for the podcast stuff I do for Gallup. I'm like, no, I can't really. That doesn't. Let's not do that. But it made me think. I've always had this microphone because okay. If you look down here on the screen, the averageguy.tv, I try to represent the average guy. I've always had this microphone because it's
Oh,
an
yeah.
average guy microphone. I
Mm,
wanted to tell people you don't have to have an RE20. You don't have to have a Shure SM7B. You don't have to have a $500 microphone. You can do it for $50 or $70 or $100, depending on when you get the deal on these things. So I just, yeah, Chris says missed opportunity. Yeah, well, no. I mean, I'm a stockholder in the company. They don't need to be sending me a mic for
yeah.
home. Right? It is. I mean, some people would have jumped at that, but but I do have. It kind of makes me think. Okay, at work, if I'm going to switch, I'll have to see. I'll have to use that microphone for a while and see if I really like it. Maybe I'll upgrade. Maybe I won't. My average guy brand wants me to stay on this microphone because it's a really good mic for the price.
Yeah. You can't beat it. Everybody's talking preamps in the chat room, and one of the things that I know, I think it was Chris that mentioned the cloud lifter. The thing I've never, and I feel bad because the guy gave me one, like Mr. Cloud gave me a cloud lifter, and it works great. And it's really handy if you need an extension cord for your mic cable, because you have to
Mm.
plug the mic into this thing and then another mic cable in the other end of it. So you end up with 2 mic cables with it being in the middle, which is great if you need to extend it. But if you don't, now you've got another 10 feet of cable that when you only need 6. So I like the FET head. I think Randy had mentioned that, Randy Black. Because
Yeah.
the FET head, you just plug into the
Yep.
mic cable and then plug it into the mic, so you don't have this extra box and an extra cable. But I know the Rodecaster Duo and the Pro 2 or whatever it was, they're like, you don't need a FET head, and I don't know that it would hurt using one as long as you turned on whatever that's called, phantom
Wait, turn
power.
down your gain. I mean,
Yeah,
you're just adding it against an additional step. If you need it, it just depends what you like. I think in this regard,
yeah,
with microphones, it depends on what you like. What's the sound? Is it giving you the sound that you want? I've these ATR 2100s are gain hungry. And if you get a cheap audio device and you
Right.
got to crank it all the way to the end there. And so in that case, do you spend another $100 on a lifter, on a box you should have just spent $300 on to get the good preamps to begin with,
Right.
if you're going to do it? So I don't know.
Well,
Listen, I think that's a preference. I really do think that's a preference. You do what you feels best for your audio.
well, that's it. Ralph asks from Ask Ralph podcast. So I have the Rode Pod mic. Should I upgrade? I don't know. Do you like the sound of your voice? And if you
Yeah.
go, yeah, I think it sounds good. Well, then no, don't upgrade. It's really because anytime you upgrade to anything, set aside at least an hour to play with it, to dial it
No,
in.
for sure.
So anytime it's like I say, oh, I'm going to add this to my show. Okay, don't forget to budget some time. I forget. I think I got my last build. I was on like a 6 month payment plan for this YouTube course, and it's dawned on me I haven't watched a single video. It's paid for now, and I have a lifetime deal. But I'm like, I said, oh, I want to learn this YouTube stuff, and I did not set aside any time to learn the YouTube stuff. So right now, that money I've just lit on fire, But but I plan
Right.
on it, So that's you just have to keep that in mind. Ralph has another question. He says, here's an obscure question. I use my office for both recording my podcast and seeing clients. Not moving the prompter and mic is getting old. Does anyone know or do setup consulting? Well, if you want things, the coolest setup I've ever seen was an ironing board. And somebody had taken an ironing board and they used, I think, some belts. And they took a belt to hold down their interface. And they had, I think, another belt to hold down they had like a desktop stand. You just sit there and then the mic comes up and they put a belt on that. And then what they would do is when it was time to podcast, they would grab it and they'd and set it up, and there was their stuff, and all they had to do was plug it into whatever. And when they were done, they would unplug the cords, and I think they even set it up to where it would then fold up, and they would fold down the mic stand, and they would just put it over in a corner, and then the mic cables, how you end up with the like the legs of the ironing board are taller because they've now stretched out. They would just hang the cables on that, and it was just you could easily put that in a closet, and just when it comes time, you drag it out, you set it up, plug it in, and there we go. Because they just said, look, my spouse is not going to go for me taking, an office or a spare bedroom. Like that's the kids' playroom, and we can't go. Nope, can't play in there anymore. Sorry, And they didn't want them playing in the basement or something or whatever it was. So that was one. But that's where things like Jim was talking about. When you attach a low boom arm, it's not hard to take off, but that's where if you want something portable, that's where you grab one of these. He said, holding up. This is basically made for drum kits. So it's got this really heavy bass on it. And then you basically, put this on your desk. This was pointed at my guitar. But, you basically can adjust this now and put it to wherever you want. And when you're done, you move it and, presto, your desk is back. So it kind of depends on what you're doing. The teleprompter, that's a different story. And that's where it would be easier, I think, if you've got your stuff set up, if you have room, just set up 2 chairs and a table. Like not a desk, a table, like a coffee table. And so when it comes time to talk to the client, you just move 6 feet to the left in these nice comfy chairs. Let's talk a little business. I'll grab my notebook. I don't know. What do you think, Jim, if you need, because otherwise you're like trying to talk to your client over the
Yeah.
teleprompter, or you unscrew it. It's just, look, I get it. I have a Sony ZV-100 camera right here, and the reason I quit using it is because I had to get out of my desk. I know the horror, but I had to get out of my desk, turn it on, unplug it, go to the menu and say I want to do streaming, and then plug the cable in. And it was just the fact that I had to get out of my chair, and it was like with the Elgato, whatever it is, Facecam Pro, I just go turn on the camera, And I was like, you know what? It doesn't look that much better like with this. And I'm like, I'm just going to go with the easy one. So I
Hmm.
totally understand the like, it's kind of a
Hmm.
pain in the butt to take it down every time. But I don't know. What are your thoughts, Jim?
Well, every time you introduce any kind of cable movement or unplugging cables or moving things around, you always introduce a problem. It's just gonna something's not gonna get seated properly. Something's not gonna work the way it did before. Eventually the cables wear out. I mean that's really hard on equipment. You think about sound. I did a lot of live music stuff, 20 years ago, and man, we would roll through cables like crazy, just from all the beating those things take. So I think it's always better if you can. It's probably cheaper too, to try to set up a studio and leave it as much as you can. If you can't, then I do like I imagine, Dave, like, by the way, you were super kind on the sound that ironing board made when you open it up. You were like whoosh, and it's more like
Oh, it sounds, yeah. It almost has a Godzilla movie kind of,
exactly. Yeah.
yeah. So,
Exactly. Yeah, that was you were a lot better,
yeah.
that time. I think I might hold on, let me wipe the blood out of my ears. Well, so, the but if you can maybe compromise in the middle with kind of a setup in a box, so to speak, or something like the ironing board where things are on a box that maybe you move around or it's built into it, so that you're minimizing some of the cable in and out, or with your computer maybe you can use a docking station, or you can use some cables to help minimize the number of times you have to plug and unplug it. It's just hard on it's hard on stuff. I mean, think about like my lightning connection in the car that I use, when I plug my phone in to connect it to Apple Auto. Well, that lightning cable, man, it has a life expectancy of about a year before,
Mm.
because it's plug, unplug, plug, unplug, plug, unplug, sitting in a cold car, sitting in a hot car, plug, unplug, plug, unplug. So the more you can minimize that and set it up in a way that you're not moving cables around, I think the better. Hey, if you have to do it to get it done, it's what you have to do. But try to minimize the steps, I think, of where things are, and try to get them consolidated into something that's not moving around all the time. That'll save you some test and setup, because there's that one time you're in a hurry and you have a guest waiting and you can't get your stuff together, and you're like, oh, hold on just a second. I can't. And then they're like, who is this guy? So that would be my advice.
Yeah. John is asking your thoughts on the Mackie DZL Creator XS, that's a mouthful, versus the Rodecaster Duo. I have seen the Mackie. The reason somebody asked, like, do I like the Duo better than the Rodecaster Pro? And I do, because it takes up about, I don't know, a hand width of my desk. The Pro. I got the Duo simply because I'm never gonna have four people in here. I don't know if they would fit. And I just wanted my desk back. And now in theory, if I didn't do this show where this is made for this, right? Live streaming, I would just use the pod mic on the USB, because the software that comes with this is basically a Rodecaster with the big bottom and the, all the other things that the Rodecaster has built in. With a Rode pod mic, it's like getting, a Rodecaster single channel for just you doing solo. So, I mean, I could, in theory, do this, but it would be a little trickier than, depending on what I could have all the music in Ecamm and do the intro music that way if I really, really wanted to. But the biggest thing was the space. And so when you compare that to the Mackie DZL, that thing is a beast. I saw it at a trade show. John, if you want to, Daryl Darnell, reach out to Daryl, because he was at the booth, I think for BSW at the time, and they had one sitting there next to the Rodecaster. And the thing I would like about it being older is the screen is a whole lot bigger. So, and I think it does maybe a little more. Again, speaking very much out of my butt here, but it seemed like you could do more without a computer on the Mac. Like you could actually go in and drag your finger on stuff. So it looked a little more flexible. I just remember thinking, wow, that would take up my entire desk. So that was my biggest reaction when I saw the Mackie one was like, wow, that thing is ginormous. But I think it was made maybe to be less dependent on a computer because there was a lot of stuff you could do right there on the screen. So it's always fun. The other thing about the Rodecaster, because I have one, it turns out it was in my closet. The original Rodecaster is in my, and I'm like, well, I might be able to get $50 for that now. And the difference between that one, so Rodecaster 1 versus Rodecaster 2, there was a noticeable difference in preamps. Now it wasn't like when I was talking on the Rodecaster, it was like, it wasn't that much hiss, but there was a little, but that again is listening in a quiet room, smashing your headphones into your head. You go, I think I hear more hiss, it's so that one, and it has a cover on it. I was like, okay, I need to sell that. And so did I look at it and go, ooh, it's so much better? It was better. And I forget there was a couple other things. Oh, the fact that on the Rodecaster, when you export your files, you get all 16. Like whether you only had one channel or not, you're getting 16 tracks of nothing. Where 15 them, where this, like right now, I'm going to get 5 tracks because I have the sounds, I have me, and I have Jim. And for whatever reason, I did not turn off channel 3. So that was the other thing I really liked about it. A little faster to transfer the stuff over. But other than that, there wasn't a huge difference. I know they just came out. Somebody mentioned that they just came out with an upgrade. Yeah, Uncle Marv is doing well with their firmware updates, adding features like the virtual channels they just added. So what this is if I want, it's really made for gamers. In fact, in the video from Rode, they're like, hey, this is for streamers. And so you want to have Spotify going to you, but you can't play that over your YouTube. You could easily route your music just to you. And then if you maybe for a podcaster, if you were using some sort of tool for sound effects and you didn't have, that doesn't make any sense. I was going to say, and you didn't have a Rodecaster, except we're talking about the Rodecaster update. But I guess if you wanted to have sound from your computer go into your stream, and then you can dictate how much of this goes to, because if you're doing a game, right, it's you and your team and you're shooting people or whatever, you could send some things to just your team. If I understood this right, there was a lot of routing to it that I was like, oh, neato, never use it. Very much like, oh, you can use the sound buttons as MIDI triggers. I'm like, yep, I get it, never going to use it. So it's it is one of those things that on one hand, what I like about it is from what I've seen, I haven't upgraded yet. It doesn't add a huge amount of complexity to the interface, because that's the whole problem. When you add new features, I'm like, did you just mess up the interface? And from what I've seen of the videos, it didn't. So that's good news. So, but yeah, so any of those, I don't think any of them are bad. When we're talking better, we're talking 3% better. So it's not a huge deal. Randy says my average usage of podcast gear must be in the excess of 7 years, but my first rack of gear was in place twice that long. Yeah, a lot of times if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Todd the Gator, the ATR 2100 series, you could throw it in a junk drawer and use it in a decade. Yep, those things are bulletproof. Same thing with the Shure SM58. That's a non-USB mic, but and John's like, hey, anybody want to buy a slightly used Rodecaster Pro 1? And it's in a travel case. Yeah, that's always fun. Tim is asking, when will Descript drop Squadcast and fully push Descript rooms? I had a client interview the governor of Wyoming, and Squadcast was garbage, and Descript customer service said, try rooms next time. Interesting. I don't understand. Here's where I wish they had some transparency. And when I go to Podfest next month, I'm hoping the guys from Squadcast are going to be there. I'm confused, as in like, didn't you buy Squadcast Descript? And if so, is really rooms just an upgraded version of Squadcast? And I don't know. It's just confusing. I'm with you on that, Tim. I don't get it. Why did you buy something and then replace it? Or is the replacement just because they're not calling it Squadcast? They're trying to get everything under the Descript, umbrella. Jim, you can help with this one, maybe. Mathematica Humanista. I want to generate live English subtitles for my podcast that is run in Portuguese. Any tips or services on that? I know you've worked with multiple languages.
Yeah, you're going to pay for it. No cheap way to do that. You're going to for live translations is what you're asking for, not transcripts, right? It has to be it's actually both. Because you're running it in Portuguese, then a system needs to translate or put those in a transcript, right? Transcribe them. Then they have to be translated. And so Microsoft was headed in this direction for a while. And their app, their translator app, the Microsoft Translator, if you just go to your both Google or Android, both Android and iPhone app stores, they used to make that available for everybody where you could play the sound into it and then someone could watch it on their phone watch it on their phone or listen to it because it's got a voice associated with it as well. And they could do that, and that was free, and it worked great. And then they deprecated it. I think they figured out it was costing them too much money because it's expensive, and they took it down. So there are services that do that. I'm trying to think. I think we used a service at Gallup to do some of that, but they're still not mainstream, and you're going to end up paying for them. And there's no easy way to do it. I think we're getting closer to some of that happening with AI. I'm not aware of today. Dave, at work, when I produce a podcast in another language, we do it. And just this week, I did one in Japanese. We do them in Portuguese and Mandarin and French, German, Spanish. I do the Spanish one all the time. I actually use that Microsoft Translator app to listen. So I have a second computer that's just hanging out in the chat or hanging out in StreamYard there. It's listening basically to the feed. Then I'm pushing that into an iPad that is using the translator app, and I'm able to translate it from their language to English pretty fast for me. I can't broadcast that at this point. That doesn't work on a broadcast format, but I can see it. So we're getting really good at that. I think there'll be some services coming up to make that better. Today, you're going to pay a service for that to get it done. So I couldn't tell you which ones to use, but I don't know of anything open source or free right now. Again, Microsoft was headed in that direction and then they pulled it back.
Yeah, that's especially live. I could see where that adds another zero to the price probably if you want to do that live.
Yeah, the live is hard, and the live translations that I do, especially in Spanish, I think they would be better. Actually, the Mandarin is a lot better. Of course, there's more people who speak that than speak Spanish, but you're doing 3 steps. So you're doing the computer has to transcribe it, then it has to translate it. And then you really need a third step, which is, and your brain is doing this, is you're actually translating the translation, because the translation's a transliteration in a lot of cases, not a true translation. It's making an attempt to do word for word, and it doesn't take into account any meaning or any context. A true translator, a human translator, would take into account context and inflection and some of the nuances of the language. And so, as an example, when we talk about Clifton's strengths or people's strengths, we kind of understand that to be the things we're good at. But in Spanish, that translates to this kind of fortaletas, this kind of strength, the muscle strengths. So you have to kind of do some explaining on that to be like, no, we're not talking about working out. We're talking about those things that we're good at. So you have to do some. So today, when you're looking at a translator app, you're actually doing a third translation in your head because it's transliterating it. Then you're kind of translating it to give it some context. When we do Clifton Strengths stuff, I already have a framework from which I kind of understand what they're talking about and why they're talking about it. So it makes it a lot easier for my brain to do the actual translation. It's much, much harder in a you say you're just talking to somebody trying to get directions somewhere. That's a little bit of a difference. So transcriptions, transliterations, and translations are three very separate tasks that have to be done in that. We're getting really good at it.
Yeah.
It'll just get better. Yeah, it'll just get better.
Chris from castahead.net, I still think 95% of podcasters don't need something like a Rodecaster Pro. It has so much capability, but most people just like a simple quality plug and play. Yep, I would agree. And it's, well, so, I mean, the reason the SM7B is so popular, as was the Heil PR40, it's because somebody was being very popular using it. So when Leo Laporte switched to the Heil PR40, everybody's like, oh, I got to get a Heil PR40. And then when Joe Rogan came out and he had the SM7B, they're like, well, if that's it. And Randy brings up the point. He says a lot of podcasters, right? We get gear thinking it will help them grow. And in my last episode, I did a deep dive on media hosts, because really I have my favorite, right? But my favorite may not be the best choice for you, because you don't need all the bells and whistles that I'm using. And it's kind of the same thing with gear. Yeah, I'm using a Rodecaster Pro. If I wasn't doing a live show, I wouldn't have a Rodecaster Pro, because most of my shows are solo. And if I was doing interviews, I would just plug the podcast, in my case, the Rode PodMic USB into Squadcast, record my interview. I don't need a Rodecaster. Yeah, it has all the effects and the big bottom and things like that. Yeah, and I have all that in my plugin, so I don't really need it. But unless somebody's saying, like for me, when do you need a new mic? When you're using the built-in microphone of your laptop, or you're using your phone and you have it on, whatever you call it, or your speaker phone. Like, no, if you don't have a mic that you paid at least $60 for, you could probably improve. And it's like Jim said, like when you go from, I remember when we all started, like the early days of podcasting, we had that stick microphone that came,
Yeah.
And it just
Packard Bell.
everybody
With your
said,
Packard Bell PC.
welcome to the
Uh-huh.
podcast. Right. Okay. So when you move to an Audio Technica 2100 or a Samson Q2U, you're going to sound way better. But when you go from one of those mics to the pod mic, you sound a little better. And when you go from a pod mic to an SM7B, a little bit, when you go from, it's marginal once you get to, a decent mic. And we always make fun of the Blue Yeti, but it's not because the Blue Yeti's a bad microphone. It's because everybody uses it wrong. You can actually get a decent sound out of a Blue Yeti. I mean,
Sure.
Rob
Sure
Walsh from The Feed in Libsyn, he has a Blue Yeti, but he has it on a stand, and it's, 3 fingers from his mouth, and he's, got it set right to where it's only picking up from the front, so, but I think a lot of people, unfortunately, because what's easier to do? Go to Amazon, or better, go to Sweetwater and buy a microphone, or take the time to really understand what my audience wants and tweak my content, and blah, like that takes a whole lot more work. And so people buy the mic, and it's like, then they wonder why it didn't, I'm not getting any more downloads, and I got a new mic. I'm like, yeah, because it's not the tech. Your sound is fine. It's the content. I always think of, I think it was Bill Clinton when he was running for office, and he said, it's the economy, stupid. Yeah, that's it. I'm telling you now. Was that Clinton that said that? Is the economy stupid?
That's a good question. That's the second time I've heard that quote in a month. That's weird. Maybe it was.
But that's where,
well,
to me,
Dan says too in chat. Dan says, I think sometimes people don't realize the room around the mic can matter as much as the mic itself, right? And room treatments, and what do you have running in it, and are there beeps, and are things bouncing off stuff? Man, I at work I deal with this all the time, and people come in and they're like, "How do I sound?" And they're on a puck that's 1,000 miles away, and like, well, but IT just sent me this thing, and I'm like, well, okay, you got to get it closer to you, and you got to be in a room that's not just they're in their kitchen with tile floors and hardwood table, and you're like, yeah, you're in an echo chamber, my friend. How do you think you sound? Oh, is it good enough? No, it's not good enough. Like, it's terrible. And the funny thing is, when I unfortunately, I probably say those exact words. I'll say to them, "Your sound is terrible." It
Yeah.
gets so, it gets so like,
Yeah.
well, what do I do? Remember that headset that we sent you back during COVID to use? Yeah, pull it out. But and Dave, I don't understand why people are so afraid to wear those headsets. Like, it doesn't make you look ugly. It's your hair is gonna be
It
fine.
messes with my
Yeah,
hair. Watch the hair.
yeah.
Yeah.
No, I mean, it's like, put on a freaking headset. It sounds a million times better than, and I've got some folks that I record regularly now, and if I'm producing them, they show up with their headset on because they know I'm going to
They
say,
know.
"Hey, where's your headset? Like, where's the microphone?" Some of them have bought their own microphones. They're kind of catching on. I think what I should do, and maybe this is probably just unique to me, but I should make them edit something that they do just one time. Like, hey, I'm going to record you, but you're going to be responsible for the edit. Because I don't think they go back and listen to them enough. I think they record it and I don't think they ever listen to it again. Once you start listening to and editing your own audio, you start going, oh, yikes. That's so if you have a co-host who has a like, maybe you have a co-host who has a problem with mic technique or mic control or bad spot, or it's a little echoey or some of those kinds of things, stop doing the editing for a week. Say, hey, could you do me a favor? I need you to edit the file this week. Because I guarantee you, most people don't go back and listen to what they were on or what they just did or some of those, make them
Yeah.
do it.
Yeah. Dan says the thank you to the chat room, Rich and Randy. It's the economy stupid was a phrase copied by James Carville in 1992 when he was advising Bill Clinton on his successful run for the White House. So there we go. But yeah, it's the thing that gets me with the bad audio. In fact, let's go to here. See, I just pressed the button. 1001, 1002, 1003. Okay, we're gonna press the button again. Yeah, I don't know what's going on with the stream deck.
Yeah, needs to be rebooted.
So I occasionally interview guests for my podcast, and while I'm pretty good at knowing who's going to work and who isn't, one seemingly unpredictable attribute is whether they have the ability to monologue or to elaborate on a talking point. I usually try various angles of attack when this happens, ask more open-ended questions, try to feed them a line of thinking as a follow-up question to encourage them to say more, but that doesn't always work on the fly. Over time, I've even stated, meeting briefly with my guests beforehand, that they chose to try to feel them out and offer them more or less detailed outlines of what I intended to ask. Always a good thing to let a guest know why they're there. Even with those tweaks and variations, though, once in a while, I get a guest who is really interesting and sometimes has even done more scripted speaking, and I just cannot for the life of me get full-length sentences out of them. Over the summer, I had one guest who had a pretty interesting background, but I could not, no matter what I did, get more out of them than, yeah, I agree, definitely, or I would say so, or at most a 1 to 2 line answer. I try to edit together something of substance, but for the first time, it was just so dead on arrival that I had to reach out to them and let them know I wouldn't be publishing the episode. So I'm going to stop there. Number one, good for you for not publishing crap. That's, again, you're the goalie. He says, don't get me wrong, this doesn't happen a lot, but when it does, it's super stressful in the moment and even more afterwards to choose between publishing a very mediocre episode and disappointing someone who volunteered their time and expertise to be interviewed. How should I approach guests like this? Should I edit down their interview to a series of clips along with my own narration? That's not a bad option, really. Is it ever appropriate to refuse to publish? Yes, in my opinion. Or do you feel that a guest is owed publication in exchange for their time? What if you try to encourage them to speak more freely and elaborate on their answers? So this is where all these scenarios require an awkward conversation, right? You're either awkwardly saying, I'm not going to publish that, or whatever. So I would have the awkward conversation in the interview and just go, yeah, hey, awesome, Jim. Hey, Jim, I'm just going to, this is an edit point for the editor, but just like, look, we're not under a time constraint. So I love that you're giving me short, succinct answers, but if you could expand on these a bit and really give the behind the scenes and just, I don't need just one word answers. Just expand on that. Does that make sense? And Jim would say, yeah, sure, fine, okay, whatever, and then we'd go back to the interview. So that's the awkward conversation, because then you're not, because if you go, all right, I'm not going to publish this now, you also have the problem of, oh crap, what are we going to put out this week? So this way you have an awkward conversation, and hopefully that awkward conversation gives you something to publish. I don't know, Jim, any thoughts on this?
I'm going to say something kind of controversial on
Oh,
this one. Bad audio is your fault 100% of the time. It can always be prevented. It could always be. Listen, we got a bunch of podcasters in the chat room right now, and they're going to lose their minds and be like, no, no.
I agree with you.
It's always your fault. You did not set up the call properly. You accepted more risk than you like. If you're gonna get a big deal on, like you're gonna get a big deal guest, and you're not, so because of that, you're not going to require a pre-call, or you're not going to require, we kind of do a meet and greet call. So just I kind of get a feel for the guest. We have some conversations about, hey, what we're going to do and how this is going to work and where I need you to be. If you can't do all those, you're accepting the necessary risk then of them coming in hot and bad. And sometimes it works. Maybe you've seen them on other podcasts where they have the right equipment, they're going to be in the right spot. Did you do your homework? Did you go, if you got a guest coming on, have you looked at the last 3 times they've been on something to see, are they consistently coming from the same place? Are they consistently getting the right audio? Are you doing your homework on the guest? So I'd love to blame it on other people. And I honestly, I have. In fact, I probably 20 minutes ago, I blamed it on people coming in with bad microphones, right? You just heard me say that. It's my fault. It's my fault if I record audio that's bad. And so I just own it and let's just stop playing the blame game on folks and saying, oh, I can't, they're not, it didn't, do I publish it or not? Well, no, you don't publish it, but it's your fault. So
right.
Be better.
Uncle Mark said, Uncle Marv says people think it's good enough to work for Zoom, and Chris says the same thing, but it works for Zoom.
Not true.
And
That's not a true statement.
Yeah, Todd said, I had a co-host who used a Blue Yeti correctly, but sat next to the furnace. Yeah, that's right. And so this is where I've had one guy that I did not publish his episode, and I didn't know him. I got him, and this is no reflection on Podmatch, but I found him he was a coach of coaches. And I was like, that's the guy I want, because that way I think every coach should have a podcast. And if I can be this guy's buddy, then he'll tell all of his coaches, buddy, go see Dave. And so I asked him to come on. We did a pre-interview. His content on the pre-interview was really good, but he had like no microphone. And I said, okay, great. We'll set up this date. Be sure to bring your good microphone, because I've heard you sound so much better and it's a podcast, et cetera, et cetera. He showed up, no good microphone, and then did a horrible interview, which my takeaway was, here's how you succeed. You have this guy's dad as your father, and you'll be great. I'm like, that's not going to work. And so I kind of knew that in the interview, and I got done, and I was like, okay, I can't publish this. There's no takeaway, and his audio is crap. And so I said, can we get on a Zoom call? I want to talk about our interview. And I said, well, remember I said to bring your good microphone? I go, you didn't. And I go, and you went in fact, he even said, I want to talk about this. Like, he just took the interview and went, oh, I'm going to do my presentation now. And I said, there's no takeaways for my audience. And he pitched me so hard because he wanted me as a client, it turns out. And in the end, I don't know that he dislikes me. He probably, I wasted his time, but I kind of told him, hey, since I don't know you, I reserve the right to not publish this. So let's say that guy thinks I'm a jerk. Okay, great. I'd rather have one guy think I'm a jerk than the hundreds, hopefully, of people. Let's see, for that show, hundreds of people that listen to me that go, thanks, Dave, you just wasted my time. Yeah. So for me, it's all about the audience. And, that guy, if he thinks, I'm a jerk, that's fine. I think he's a jerk because it was all about him.
Yeah,
and like,
it's super hard. I did an interview Friday. I did an interview in Japanese so some language, a little bit of a language barrier, although they both spoke English, so it was fine. And we did a setup call. I set it up as best as I could. he even came in on his phone because he couldn't get his laptop working right. And so I walked him through that, and he miraculously got the laptop set up while we were doing, some chatting in there. So I got it all set. It was fine for what we do. And then as soon as the interview started, he had a nervous tick where he was tapping the table, you
Oh,
know, or something. I could not figure out where the sound was coming from. It wasn't in the pre show at all. Now, what I should have done is I started hearing it at the very beginning, and I should have stopped. I should have stopped both of them and said, "Okay, I don't know what's going on. We need to," and I didn't. That's my fault, not theirs. My fault for not stopping them. And then, of course, you get 15 minutes in, and you're like, I really want to start over on, there was this big monologue in the very beginning, and sometimes on the second take it's not as good, right? And so I'm like, do I really want to? So I let it go on, and the whole time I listen, Dave, I can feel my heart just ready to explode out of my body, right? I know. I'm like, oh my, this is gonna be terrible. Now I'm gonna have to tell him, and there's a principle in this too. The earlier you stop things, the earlier you say something, the less damage. The damage you're doing on that file is exponential. It's not linear, it's exponential. It just keeps getting worse and worse and worse. So I let it go. It was a huge mistake. I should have stopped it. Fortunately, right after it was over, and I didn't want my editor to have to deal with this. So fortunately, I was able to pull the file down when we were done. I ran it through Auphonic. It took out all the tapping that was in there. And now you can hear the gating. You can hear the software gate coming in and going on that.
oh yeah.
Whatever they're doing in Auphonic, you can kind of hear it a little bit. Now, is that me because I'm listening for it? Or like, when you're like, when you're listening for an AI voice, do you hear it because you know it? And if you don't know it, you probably don't hear it. I fixed it for my editor. It was good. It was good enough for what we were trying to do, but it was a perfect example of a reminder to me. All of that, it's my fault. I am the one responsible to make sure that I should have, and I don't do this enough. I should have stopped it at the 2-minute mark. It said, "Oh, hold on, pop back in. Let's stop for a second. I'm hearing some tapping. How do we get this thing worked out so it's not doing it right?" So earlier is better. It's all on you.
Yeah, absolutely. The chat room is chiming in on this. Um, I had let's see, where'd it go? Yeah, Uncle Marv again. People think it's good enough for Zoom, and I had a thing where she had plosives, and I asked her 3 times. She had a headset mic, and it was getting kind of awkward because I'm like, okay, move it again. Now say happy peanut butter. And like she did it was kind of better, but I eventually there were just every P, B, H, and K. Like for whatever reason, all those just made this nasty sound on the thing. And it took me 3 hours to go to every one of those, highlight it, and pull the bass out of it. This is years ago, so we didn't have the tools now that we do. And that's what Dan says. There are some editing tools out there now with all that have been able to. I know you mentioned Auphonic. There's Adobe Enhance. Somebody mentioned that earlier. I used a tool, and it was not cheap. It was $300, and it was, he said, pulling up Hindenburg behind the scenes, so I can. It's Accentize. Okay, Accentize is the company. D-Revive Pro, and it does a great job of pulling out the room noise and adjusting the EQ to where it can take bad audio. Because I have a client of mine, and he's decided to have a reoccurring co-host spot, and he's pulling in these like 3 different people. And I said, there were 2 of them, and I said, these people need to go get, a microphone. And the one did, and it cut his editing time in half. And the other one didn't, and I have to run it through this, and I have to run it through D-Breath, and I have to run it through D-Plosive and all this other stuff. And the thing is, we said it before, when you add something to the process, it's going to take more time. And so when you add all these plugins to clean up the bad audio, yeah, it does, and it saves you time from doing it manually, but it really slows down the export process. And so I was like,
That can make it sound worse, right? It can make it sound worse.
Yeah, noise gates, especially if you're trying to get somebody's sound out in the background because they've got, Todd said the furnace. Okay, that's great that the furnace doesn't, come through when they're not talking, but the minute they talk, you hear the sound of that in the background, and
Yeah.
sometimes that actually makes it worse in some cases. Jeff
I
says,
think. Oh, go ahead.
here's a fun one. I had Jeff C. I had a guest who had a tech chat before the show, perfect, but then they called in from a different location. You know,
Why
and
did we do this? Like,
yeah,
I've had that happen too, Jeff, by the way. And you're like, hey, you're not in the same location we did this. Oh yeah, no, I things changed. Again, the bigger deal they are,
yeah.
right? Things change. I don't know what it is with high profile guests that their schedules are just so out of control that they can't,
Right.
and they're like, oh no, I got called into Singapore. And you're like, oh geez, well maybe we should do this a different, on a different day or something. But yeah, it's for sure.
Yeah. Randy says if we don't fight for our audience, who's going
Yeah.
to?
Yeah.
And then Dan again, based on a true story podcast.com, I had a guest with audio that was great in the interview, but looking at the file afterwards, it was really like not recorded hot enough. And he says Adobe Podcast Enhanced version 2, which is something I should probably buy. I mean, I have the plugin, so I don't need it, but I've used their free version and that works great 90% of the time. But if you pay, I think it's $100 a year. It's not that expensive. There's a dial to say how much of this effect do I want? Because we all know that there's that fine line that you go from good, oh underwater. If you just go a little too much, it kind of ruins the audio on whatever noise reduction tool you're using.
I
But
actually think we're coming to a day where that's going to change when you get bad audio from a person. Say you and we're doing this podcast today, and I find out at the end of the show, like I was really coming in from my camera mic and not from this mic, which I've done before.
yeah,
And I think we're coming to a day where, today we try to go in there and adjust that digitally, but in an analog kind of way, where we try to cut out the bottoms or cut out the tops or push the, compress it in some way or expand it in others. I actually think we're pretty close where if all I need is a short audio sample of you when you were good, and then I
yeah,
think AI just fixes that for us so that it just, right. So you have a guest, they didn't sound very good. If you can find 30 seconds of good audio from them somewhere, or you say, hey, the sound wasn't as great. Let's meet one more time. I need to record you reading this statement. It's going to take about 10 minutes. Can we do that? And you get them, you get them someplace where you get better audio. I think we'll get to a spot where you'll feed that in and the AI will take the audio itself and redo it, and it'll sound super clear. I mean, it kind of already is doing this. I mean, 11 Labs is kind of doing this today in some form or fashion. It's not scalable from a long hour-long podcast standpoint, but man, I think we're getting super close to that. That's the way they do it, is an AI voice changes it with perfect audio. Then you're not trying to eliminate, like, oh, I'm trying to take out this frequency because there was a dog barking in the background. No, it's just overwriting the whole thing. And it's getting the inflections that you make in the in the original audio. It's picking up on those inflections and some of those kinds of things. So I just think I think the day of trying to digitally pull out things from it are I think we're getting close to the end of that, and I think AI is going to take over those kinds of edits. Imagine how cool that would be to just, or Dave, for us to just have a digital voice that's available out there to someone, and you can say, yeah, let's do this recording, but I want you to process it with my already approved perfect digital voice that I have out there, so it sounds good every single time. That would be great.
Adobe has a tool, and I will have to look it up. It's part of their podcast like tools that's like mic check, and like you record into it, and it'll say you need to be closer to your microphone, or that kind of thing. So you can let Adobe be the bad guy, and it's hard to be the bad guy. John Domingo says I edit for a famous podcaster who has the worst mic technique. He's a whisperer. Sounds like a Seinfeld, Oh no, the whisperer, and trails off at the end of sentences. I wanted to talk to him about it, but I don't want to upset him. Oh, this is where anytime you have to give somebody bad news, you want to explain it to them on how they're going to benefit. So if you have somebody that is just horrible and you're like, they're just talking and then all of a sudden they get comfortable and all of a sudden they're leaning back in their chair and you're like, wait, 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 wait. And you're like, hey, I love what you're saying. This is great content. My audience is going to love this, but we got to keep you next to the mic so it sounds great. Because otherwise, if I try to fix this later that you've kind of gotten, and I understand you're getting comfortable, and that's great. I want you comfortable, but the minute we have, it'll end up like cutting off half your words, and we need all of your words. So if you could just do me a favor, it's, just stay close to the mic, whatever it is you need them to do. Or if it's like, I need you to get a real mic, not this, I know it works in Zoom. I just totally get that, but this isn't Zoom. This is this is meant for other people to listen, where a Zoom meeting is just for the 6 people in it and that kind of yard. So when you explain on how great they are and you're trying to make them sound as great as their content, just blow a little smoke, which isn't really smoke if you think about it, but just explain how great they are and how you want to make them, make the content sound as great as it needs to be. I don't think anybody's going to be like, well, no, I don't want you to make me sound good. Like, I don't see anybody saying that, but it's awkward. It's just awkward. But I think if you explain to them how this is going to help them and remind them that people are going to hear this, but I know that's got to be the number one thing. It's like, well, it works for Zoom. Yeah, this isn't Zoom. This isn't a Zoom meeting. This is a podcast. So that's kind of tricky.
I hear it all the time, and it just like, I even, I shouldn't say this, but I have a guy who has a mic, and he does we do big corporate events, and he does it with this. They sent him this puck, and he sounds like he's 1,000 miles away.
Oh yeah.
Like, stop it. But you can't convince. Both Randy and Chris said in chat, Descript has a regenerate in a pinch. It's fairly decent. What I was talking about, I don't know if that regenerate function is taking the voice print, the digital voice print, right? That's really what you need. A digital voice print of that person in that interview and then doing some things to it, make it better. Or in Descript, and maybe you guys can tell me in the chat, in Descript, can you feed it another voice print? So can you say, hey, by the way, the blockchain would be really good for this solution, where I could upload my own digital voice print to the blockchain and certify it. Say, no, this is me. Like, this is me. And then we're always worried about how are we going to know it's real or not? Well, in the future, what if every voice has to be validated against the voice print that you have in a blockchain somewhere that only you have access to? No one can create it for you. No one can manipulate it in that way. So there's we're always looking for blockchain solutions. That's one of those that this will play nicely into. But what I would want is, I would want to be able to take an existing piece of audio and say, every time this person speaks, fix it with this sample that I gave it that was clearer or better. Because if all you've got is bad audio of them, I don't know if Regenerate's going to do much more than apply mathematical algorithms to try and fix the audio stuff. I mean, that's easy to do today. So I don't know if that can do it. You guys can let me know there in the chat.
Yeah, I love this one. Number one, the whole "it's your fault." That's 100% true, and that's why it hurts. The Todd the Gator. If you're the producer or the host of the podcast, I would also go further and say that bad content prep is 100% your fault. Yeah. When you're, that's where Notebook LM from Google can help in some cases. Like, hey, go, or ChatGPT, I know you can point it at YouTube, like at a YouTube video, and go summarize this. So instead of watching a half-hour video, like, hey, can you give me something in the next 6 minutes before this meeting starts? That's not good. Not that I've ever done that. No. Let's see. And Todd says, yeah, it's always that one episode that you let the audio slide, and that's the one your friends hear and they turn off, never to return. He goes, yeah, that's true. And then I'm with Randy on this one. One of the reasons why I like the Elgato face cams, there's no microphone. So you can't accidentally use the microphone from the camera.
Next camera. I have a Brio, but it's designed, they're just trying to be helpful with this.
Yeah.
But next camera I get down here will not have a microphone in it for sure.
John says, yeah, it works on Zoom. Yeah, well, guess what? You sound like crap on Zoom too. So, and then Chris makes a great point. He goes, if you really want to get tweaked out, if you just want to push your buttons, try listening to the audio in these NFL post-game press conferences. They're not good for audio nerds, especially after a loss. My favorite is that they've never thought to do like a conference where like, hey, if you have a question, walk up to the mic. No. So it's always like, it's the press conference and the guy's in the background. He's like, so what do you think about the example? I don't know. And then the guy answers the question. It's like, well, I thank my team. We work together. We die together. And you're like, wait, what was the question? That sounds like every answer to every press conference. My favorite is always like, so when you threw that interception, what was going through your mind? I was thinking I wanted to throw it to the other team. I'm like, no, what do you think he was thinking? NFL, just don't get me started. The no fun league.
Hey, before we run out of time, we're having a great conversation on this, but do we need to thank our awesome supporters?
We do need to thank our awesome supporters. Now, the fun thing is I've pressed the button and I need to update. My guess is when I get done with this, I'm going to go into Stream Deck and it'll say there's an update available. There we go.
There you go.
So yes, we do want to thank our awesome supporters and remind you that this show is brought to you by theschoolofpodcasting.com, where you get courses, coaching, and community. And you can use the coupon code COACH. And when you join, there is a 30-day money-back guarantee. So you don't have to worry about, I'm not sure if this is right for me. And we're using PodPage. If you go out to Ask the Podcast Coach, you can see our version of PodPage. And of course, that's completely customizable. And now with audience surveys. So if you want to go into 2024, quit guessing what your audience wants. Just ask them. And right now, as we're streaming, we're using Ecamm. If you want to check it out, Ecamm Live, go to askthepodcastcoach.com/Ecamm. And Cam has 2 M's. And if you need more Jim Cullison, well, heck, who doesn't? Go over to theaverageguy.tv. Or if you want to be a rebel, you can go over to homegadgetgeeks.com. Either one. I know. Crazy.
What? Those both work?
And let me go. I could not get this to work today in Ecamm. I was having all sorts of problems, and my I have a friend in from out of town, and he showed up, and I'm like, I'm doing show prep. I'm not, so I'm a little behind today, but I do have it set up here. And so who will it be? The supporter of the week?
Yeah.
Will it be?
Yeah.
Wait, hold on. I think I got to make sure because I was showing it to my buddy. Yeah, so I have to clear the results because in my test. Man, there are so many windows right now from clear the list. There we go. Will it be, Ralph from Ask Ralph Podcast or AI Goes to College or John Muntz or Jody Krangle? Well, we'll find out right now when I hit spin. And the answer is, it's looking like, nope, it's Randall Black from Bible Bites. If you want to check it out, Bites is BYTES. It's inspiring faith, one bite at a time, Bible-bites.com. Randall, thank you so much for being an awesome supporter. And if you, dear listener, or people in the chat room, if this show saves you time, if it saves you money, if it saves you a headache, or just one, if it saved you a headache, or if it keeps you educated, well, it does. You don't have to pay $20 to be on the Wheel of Names. You can join for as little as $5 a month. Just go to askthepodcastcoach.com/awesome. It's a way of saying thanks, Dave and Jim. We deeply appreciate that. So now I got to go back to my note, Joy. We did have. Here's a question, and it's interesting. We were talking about this week at the School of Podcasting. Jim, I don't know how much you're involved with. I know you do your own website and things like that, but it's something I've noticed. Do you use any kind of keyword tool for your website?
I should. I don't know if I totally understand keywords all the time or if that's just a sham in itself. But no.
Well, that was the thing that came up. Chris Stone from castahead.net is a member of the School of Podcasting, and he kind of said, I'm not sure I'm buying it because when they say, oh, this is the top ranking, they never really say based on what. And then it's, and I said, because the way it works, you can see what you get a number for your podcast ranking. Like, let's say you're a 37 and it says, hey, because you're looking for keywords that have a fair amount of search, but not a lot of competition. That's the magic number. And if it says, hey, you only need to be a 34 to rank for this somewhat obscure keyword with a lot of blah, blah, blah. And so I wrote an article based on that keyword, posted it. And in theory, now again, I gave it a whole week, maybe two, but I was not getting any hits at all to this thing that, the robot said, oh, this is good. So I was just wondering if anybody is doing any kind of keyword stuff. There are a lot of tools. I've used Mangools for years, but that's one of those things, again, that I'm paying for that I'm not really using. And that, by the way, Jim, is the topic I was going to talk about at the beginning of the show that I couldn't remember.
Oh, okay. There you go. It came. Wow.
Yeah.
That one came back from the depths.
That's it. Well, because I was taught John Jamengo edits the future of podcasting. And so we have little chats behind the scenes, and he was saying how he had found a couple things that he was paying for that was like I just realized, and I remember this every year, I have a subscription to audio blogs. And I actually use that one, so I don't do it, but I canceled. Ray Edwards has an AI tool to write copy. And yes, it's cool. Yes, it's neato. Am I using it? No. What was the other? I've almost canceled Cap Show multiple times because it's $100 a month. But I gave it an episode and said write a blog post, and it was like 98%. Like, yeah, I can use that. So I'm like, okay. And then I go, so would I pay somebody $100 a month to write a blog post? And I'm like, no, but I would pay them if I had 4 blog posts out of this. So I just need to use it more. But did you find anything? Because we all buy them on Black Friday, and we forget we bought them. And then when it renews on Black Friday for the real price, not the Black Friday price, you're like, oh, like I canceled my StreamYard because StreamYard's like $800 a year now. And it was going to renew in January. And I was like, what's really weird about StreamYard, and it's kind of sneaky, you go into your billing account and you see all their plans that you can upgrade. And right below the fold, so you have to scroll down to see it, it's like cancel your StreamYard. Because I was going through, I finally went to their help article, and it's like, oh, you just have to scroll down. And I was like, you couldn't have put that right underneath the upgrade button. So you have to be careful with all these things that you subscribe to. And if you do subscribe to something, then, use it, And yeah, Chris saying SEO is witchcraft. It is a little bit. And who knows what's...
But let's remember, SEO is controlled by a company who both tells you what is trending and sells you what is trending.
Yep.
Like, they control both sides of the equation. Why they haven't been broken up yet? Oh, that's right, they are. So the system kind of sound like I need to put a tinfoil hat on here for a moment. The system's rigged, friends. SEO is rigged. So if you think you're actually, Dave, in your sense, you're writing an article, you're posting it with a bunch of keywords in it, and you're thinking organically that's going to get picked up. Not in a million years. You got to pay. You want to play, you got to pay. Like, so this a rigged system that we're dealing with here on this. And it's, there's if you haven't been following what's going on with Google in that space, there are some folks who, both the United States and Europe, who are going after them for some of these practices. So like for the average guy doing some of this stuff, I feel bad. I feel bad for you and me trying to figure out SEO and what it should be. We have people, that's their whole job. And I'm like, oh my gosh, if I'm thinking about making content, creating content, scheduling folks and doing podcasts and doing the editing, and then think about posts and what I could do for those kinds, that's a whole nother, that's all. And then listen, I think SEO, if you haven't figured it out yet, don't, because what's
it's going to change.
What's coming along with generative AI is going to be way more important. I mean, I think we're going to look at, remember Yahoo? And remember Alta Vista, and they got replaced by Google. I think OpenAI and the stuff that we're doing from generative AI work, that's going to replace Google search engines. So I think there's going to come a day. It's not tomorrow. Okay, it's not tomorrow. But I think there's coming a day in the next decade where we're going to be like, oh, remember when we used to search on Google? Ha 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 ha.
Right.
Remember the old days? Yeah, those days are. I mean, those things are coming. So I wouldn't necessarily spend a ton of time if I haven't figured it out to this point. I
Yeah.
don't think I'd try it. What I would do is get on the generative AI train and start saying, okay, how can I optimize what's going on in that space? Now, this is going to happen in generative AI as well. They're going to figure out their business model is how do I sell? How do I get the search, the generative AI bots, whatever it's doing that's building this stuff? How do I get that content to rank higher so it shows up in a generative AI search, if that's what we call them? I don't know what they're called, but in a chat, whatever. We're going to start, but I'd give up. At this point, I'd give up on SEO and say, it's old. It's on its way out. I think I'd try to figure out what's going on in the generative space.
Yeah, if you go into, because somebody's saying in the chat room that how do you, know what's working? And I believe this is the website. Yep. Let's go to screen. I hit the button. Oh yeah, nope, it didn't change. Honest. I'll put a link in the show notes. Is it seriously not going to show this on the screen? I'm hitting. There we go. GA-dev. Yeah, I'll put this in the chat room. This is a UTM, and we don't care what that stands for. But basically, what you could do here is, and you have to be disciplined with this. I just started using this. But you can see here, if I wanted to send them to learn.schoolofpodcasting.com, and for campaign ID, because the first two are mandatory, like that might be my episode number. And then the medium, I could just put SOP maybe. Some of these you don't need. And it basically will give you this particular really long link. And you'll notice that it starts after this question mark. But you can go into Google Analytics. I use Fathom Analytics. And you can see where are people coming from. And so I do this. And like the medium might, instead of website, might be Pinterest or Twitter or whatever. And we all kind of jokingly say, 50% marketing works. I just don't know which 50%. That's a way to do that. But I have that page bookmarked now so that when I'm going to go put a link to someplace, I go over, it takes 4 seconds to fill it out. I don't obsess over it. Just something to give me a clue on how did these people get to my website? Because if I start to see enough data, and that's the problem, this works great when you're Amazon and you have 8 million people coming to your website. But when you get a couple thousand a month, it's like, I'm not really getting much of enough data to really make a decision on that. So it's kind of tricky on that, but that is a way to figure out kind of what is working and what is not. Randall says, when is the last time you did a reboot of your Mac Mini? Have you exited Stream Deck software? Yeah, I'm going to do all that stuff when we get done. It's kind of weird that it's being kind of weird.
I've always kind of wondered about Ecamm's software on a Mac, because even from day one on your Mini, when you switch in between screens, when you do, like when you run the wheel, it skips a little bit, and you're like, that's not that. I kind of wonder if there's a bottleneck in the Ecamm world somewhere. I mean, it's just software. And I know I'm stepping on sacred ground because a lot of folks here love Ecamm, but I'm kind of wondering if there's some bottlenecks going on the Ecamm side. I see you more. Listen, I've watched not saying your problems with the Stream Deck are being caused by that, but I kind of wonder if the Ecamm process needs something. It should. Listen, I'm on an M4 and I see it stutter on me. And I'm kind of like, no. So I wonder if there's something going on the Ecamm side of things that makes it a little not quite as efficient. That M1 should handle everything just fine.
Yeah. And Rich mentioned the Fathom Builder, same kind of thing. They just explain things a little more, like what this is for. So this is the one I actually have. I just go to #build and my text expander puts in that URL. But it's one of those things where, for me, just doing for the past probably 3 weeks, I'm already seeing, number one, I saw where not like tons of traffic, but I get traffic from my newsletter. And so last night I was like, you know what I'm doing? My newsletter, because I haven't done one since November 15th. And I was like, this has to be on the schedule, So, and I've seen where there's a coupon code in my newsletter for the School of Podcasting. So just like there's one here. So if you use the coupon code coach, that's so I can see what works, and then Chris says you can open a ticket with Ecamm through their support link. You can easily send a diagnostic report, and they're great at getting back to you. Yeah, Ecamm that's a solid company. Jeff says I switch scenes all the time and bring up graphics constantly. I don't have the issue. I run Clean My Mac before each show. All right, I'll have to check that out. Don't think it's a bandwidth problem because I've got Google Fiber, but when was the last time I rebooted my router? Can't remember. Maybe that's the case.
Yeah. That's true. You got a lot of hops in between there. I don't see the same here. Even I don't see the same crispness between Ecamm and StreamYard, so to speak. I don't even on my own video and us doing this. This lags a little bit more than I just did a StreamYard video, 2 nights ago.
Yeah.
So it's I have a fresh M4. It's fresh.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I'm not trying to blame. You just kind of wonder, there's a lot of things that go. You're right. There's a lot more than just Ecamm, but it's got me wondering sometimes.
Yeah. Well, I can say this. It was funny. We were talking earlier about listening through the ears of a podcaster. We did a cool kind of just interview, casual chat with this guy named Chris Hutchins, who was, he's just an average Joe kind of person, started his podcast and now is basically making a living from it. And what was interesting is we used Google Meet because Podpage is very Google centric. So we used Google Meet and we thought if we pinned people, that would be okay. And it kind of worked, right? But it wasn't like this, where the only two people you see are me and Jim, and it's meant for many people to listen. Now, you can always jump in and ask thepodcastcoach.com/question. But I found out later because Chris is giving these great answers. He talks about how, like, before he goes on a show, he'll listen to 5 to 10 episodes of the show to really understand what the show is about. And then he said, don't send people just to your website, send them to something that audience would enjoy. And I was like, well, that makes sense. So I'm making these shorts, and you didn't notice it when, like right now, right? It's a kind of a full shot of me width-wise. But when this is a short, it's just on my face. Like it really zooms in. And I was like going, hey, his voice is not in sync with his mouth. And I tried like 3 different software, and it finally dawned on me. I went back into the raw, like straight from Google thing, and it wasn't in sync there. It's really, you had to really look for it. And I finally sent a copy over to Brendan, and I go, this looks like a bad Godzilla movie. He's like, what are you talking about? And I went back, and it's weird because it would start off in sync, and then halfway through the answer, it'd be kind of out of sync. Because especially when he said podcast, and you see his mouth close after you heard the st of podcast. And I was like, okay, I'm watching through the eyes of a YouTuber now. So I was getting kind of crazy about that. But that's where I think our next time we do something like that, we'll use StreamYard or Ecamm or EVMooks or whatever people are using for more of a meeting. Because again, Google Meet's kind of like a Zoom thing. It's not really meant to do that. So we shall see. But that would also then give me a separate recording of just the guest, which we didn't have from a Google Meet. And I was kind of wishing we had. But it was interesting. I bought something on AppSumo forever ago, and I thought it was one of those, upload it to the cloud and we'll give you 4 million clips. And instead it was just a video editor. It really didn't have a clip generation tool. So I tried, I think it was CapCut or whatever. Then I tried Descript. Descript actually did a decent job, but that's where I discovered, wait, he's out of sync. And it dawned on me that I finally had to keep going back. I'm like, well, that's because I'm using the edited version that I did in Camtasia. I'm like, oh, I know. Let's go back to the original. And maybe maybe it was Camtasia. I'm like, no, it was just ever so slightly out of sync from Google Meet. So at any rate, man, that went by quick today. Jim, anything coming up on Home Gadget Geeks?
Good show. We celebrate 14 years of Home Gadget Geeks on Thursday night. So that's kind of fun. 631 episodes. across those 14 years. Christian Johnson joins me. He really talks about, there was a big hack on AT&T and Verizon, and it appears that hackers have gotten access to the SMS network. So we now have RCM or RCS between iPhones and Android, probably compromised. So do not be sending any secure anything that's important. You probably want to both SMS and RCS. You probably want to be careful. Christian, there's more details on. If I freaked you out, Christian's got some details on it. It's available right now. HomeGadgetGeeks.com.
Yeah, that's because
Are you worried?
I'm sitting here with a phone on AT&T, and I'm like, oh, great, wonderful.
It freaked me out a little bit. So it was one of those like, and nobody's talking about it, which is kind of crazy. And it's a problem if you're getting secure information from an Android phone to your iPhone. It's probably being watched. So you might want to be careful.
Yeah, I'm doing my question of the month answer version. Normally I do that at the end of the month, but I was doing some things last week again about how do you choose a media host. So this week I got a few responses, and I asked my audience, if I made my show shorter, what would you cut? And if you wanted me to make it longer, what do you wish I would do? And so I only got a few responses, but probably over the next couple of weeks, you're going to hear me bang the drum hard on surveys, because it's a new year, you're starting out, and there are so many examples of like when a survey, look, I'm talking to a guy that works for a survey company. I'm preaching to the choir, but that's coming up on the School of Podcasting. We will see you next week with another episode of Ask the Podcast Coach. And I hit the stop button, but of course, it's not. End of